Hi everyone. So this video or set of videos is particularly going to be geared toward piano players and guitar players and vibraphone players, the harmonic instruments that are expected to comp and accompany and play harmonic movements under horn players and vocalists in jazz. And today I'd like to talk about something that Barry Harris refers to as the first set of moves. As I've reiterated in the previous videos, he's all about playing, like Coleman Hawkins said, playing movements and not just playing chords. And Barry Harris likes to explain how movement occurs even at the most elementary level. And before watching this video, I highly recommend you go back and watch the videos that I made dealing with the musical world and the family of four dominants. Otherwise, this information might be a little confusing to you. But if you've already seen those videos, then this information will make a lot more sense. So if we go back to this concept of a fully diminished seventh chord like this, we know that if we lower any one of those four notes a half step, we get a dominant seven. And likewise, if we do the opposite, if we raise any one of those four notes, I told you in the previous video that we get a half diminished or a diminished triad with a flat 7, but what Barry Harris likes to tell people to think of those chords as are sixth chords, because if you look at it, a half diminished seventh chord is really just what we call a minor sixth chord. In other words, a minor triad plus a sixth scale degree. So E flat half diminished is, like I'm playing here, is exactly the same as F sharp minor 6. So that minor triad with that 6. Those two are exactly the same. And you'll see later on why it's advantageous to think of these chords in terms of a sixth chord. I don't want to get into that quite yet, but I want to show you what Barry Harris explains are the first movements that happen harmonically. So let's say we're trying to play over a dominant seventh chord. Let's just say B7. Our first movement that Barry Harris explains is really just what he calls the minor 6 down to the diminished to the dominant. And what he means by that is, if B dominant 7 is here, and we know that comes from a fully diminished seventh chord, and we know that a fully diminished seventh chord can also create a minor sixth chord, then the first movement is just this. Simple enough, right? I'm just playing a bass note with my left hand to fill out the harmony a little. We just go from the minor 6 down to the diminished, down to the dominant. And that's what he explains is the first move in music, because he knows how a sixth chord is created from a diminished chord and a dominant comes from that diminished chord. So you could run through the whole circle of fourths or fifths or whatever way you want to think about it by doing that. And so on and so forth. So that's the first, what Barry Harris refers to as the first move. So rather than just playing a dominant chord, you know that you can play a minor sixth chord that comes from the same fully diminished seventh chord as that dominant, and then lower one voice, and then lower another voice. So this has implications from a chording slash accompanying standpoint, but also a compositional aspect. For instance, if you're trying to write for a choir or for an orchestra or band or whatever, then that's something we need to know. So that's the first move. And the second move that Barry Harris describes is outlining one sixth chord going to another sixth chord. Just as a reminder, another thing Barry Harris talks about is if you take two consecutive voices in a fully diminished 7 and you raise them, then you get a minor 7th chord. So if I raise these two, I get F sharp minor 7. But really, the best way to think of that, according to Barry Harris, is another 6th chord, because F sharp minor 7 is the exact same as A major 6. The exact same 4 notes. F sharp, A, C sharp, E, F sharp, A, C sharp, E. It's the exact same. So if I raise 2 notes in a diminished, I get one 6th chord. But also, if I take 2 consecutive notes and I lower them a half step, I also get another 6th chord. And so here's B minor 7, but it's the exact same chord as D major 6. A D major triad with that major 6th degree. Exact same 4 notes. B, D, F sharp, A. B, D, F sharp, A, right? It's just an inversion. So the best way to think of chords is really fundamentally how they're 6th chords, because according to Barry Harris, 6th chords do two things. They're invertible and they're less clumsy to move around. So what's the second move that Barry Harris describes? If we start from a diminished chord, we can start with the major 6th chord that's created when we raise 2 voices, and then go back down to the diminished, and then go to the other major 6th chord. So how can we put that into context? Let's say I play that in a different inversion. Let's say I do that. So this is what Barry Harris refers to as the second move, because you can play the root of the 6th chord that you move toward. So in other words, in this case, I'm moving towards D major 6. So I'm going to play a D as my bass note, and I'm going to move there. So it looks and sounds like this. And I can do that with other chords too. And all that is just moving from one 6th chord to another 6th chord using the diminished. And the reason why it works is because those 2 6th chords come from the diminished. Then we can move between them. And in a future video, I'll explain more in detail why that's harmonically acceptable. It's another Barry Harris concept, but for the sake of the length of this video, I won't get into that just yet. So what if we combine our 2 moves? The first one being the minor 6 down to the diminished, down to the dominant, and I also combine that with the second move, which is the 1 major 6th chord going to the diminished 7th chord and then going to another major 6th chord. If we combine both of those two, it looks and sounds like this. So really the overriding goal of showing you this is to show you that chords are not static vertical entities that you just play one to the other. You try to move in between them, and at a most basic level, this is how Barry Harris explains that movement takes place, and it's meant to take place because it can be explained why. So hopefully that adds more direction to your compositional endeavors, and also how you comp on other instruments, and we'll continue to explore this concept of movement for the harmonic instruments. So stay tuned for that. Thanks.